Section 4 of Weird Tales Double Feature, The Shadows, and The Projection of Armand Dubois, by Henry S. Whitehead. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. The Shadows, Part 4. This evening, at the hour when this phenomenon was accustomed to enact itself, that is, about 11 o'clock, I watched again. The scene was very much clearer, and I observed something I had not noticed before. Old Morris's simulacrum paused just before seizing the edge of the netting, raised its eyes, and began with its right hand a motion precisely like the one who was about to sign himself with the cross. The motion was abruptly arrested, however, only the first of the 4 touches on the body being made. I saw, too, something of the expression of the face that night, for the first time. At that moment of making the arresting sign, it was one of despairing horror. Immediately afterward, as this motion appeared to be abandoned for the abrupt clutching of the lower edge of the mosquito net, it changed into a look of ferocious stubbornness, of almost savage self-confidence. I lost the facial expression as the appearance sank down upon the bed and pulled the ghostly bedclothes over itself. 3 nights later, when all this had become as greatly intensified as had the clearing-up process that had affected the furniture, I observed another motion, or what might be taken for the faint foreshadowing of another motion. This was not on the part of old Morris. It made itself apparent as lightly and elusively as the swift flight of a moth across the reflection of a lamp, over near the bedroom door. The doors in my house are more than 10 feet high and 14-foot-high walls. A mere flicker of something entering the room. I looked and peered at that corner, straining my eyes, but nothing could I see save what I might describe as an intensification of the black shadow in that corner near the door, vaguely formed like a slim human figure, though grossly out of all human proportion. The vague shadow looked purple against the black. It was about 10 feet high, and otherwise as though cast by an incredibly tall, thin human being. I made nothing of it then, and again, despite all this cumulative experience with the strange shadows of my bedroom, attributed this last phenomenon to my eyes. It was too vague to be at that time accounted otherwise than as a mere subjective effect. But the night following, I watched for it at the proper moment in the sequence of old Morris's movements as he got into bed, and this time it was distinctly clearer. The shadow, it was, of some monstrous shape, 10 feet tall, long, angular, of vaguely human appearance, though even in its merely shadowed form, somehow cruelly, strangely inhuman. I cannot describe the cold horror of its realization. The head part was, relatively to the proportions of the body, short and broad, like a pumpkin head of a man made of sticks by boys, to frighten passers-by on Halloween. The next evening I was out again to an entertainment at the residence of one of my hospitable friends, and arrived home after midnight. There stood the ghostly furniture. There on the bed was the form of the apparently sleeping old Morris, and there in the corner stood the shadow, little changed from last night's appearance. The next night would be pretty close to the date of old Morris's death. It would be that night, or the next at latest, according to Mr. Bonesteel's statement. The next day I could not avoid the sensation of something impending. I entered my room and turned off the light a little before 11, seated myself, and waited. The furniture tonight was, to my vision, absolutely indistinguishable from reality. This statement may sound somewhat strange, for it will be remembered that I was sitting in the dark. Approximating terms again, I may say, however, that the furniture was visible in a light of its own, a kind of phosphorescence, which apparently emanated from it. Certainly there was no natural source of light. Perhaps I may express the matter thus, that light and darkness were reversed in the case of this ghostly bed, bureau, wardrobe, and chairs. When actual light was turned on, they disappeared, and darkness, which of course is the absence of physical light, they emerged. That is the nearest I can get to it. At any rate, tonight the furniture was entirely perfectly visible to me. Old Morris came in at the usual time. I could see him with a clarity exactly comparable to what I've said about the furniture. He made his slight pause, his arrested motion of the right hand, and then, as usual, cast from him according to his expression, the desire for that protective gesture, and reached a hard-looking, gnarled fist out to take hold of the mosquito netting. As he did so, a fearful thing leaped upon him, a thing out of the corner by the high doorway, the dreadful, purplish, shadow thing. I had not been looking in that direction, and while I had not forgotten this newest of the strange items in this phantasmagoria, which had been repeating itself before my eyes for many nights, I was wholly unprepared for its sudden appearance and malignant activity. I have said the shadow was purplish against black. Now that it had taken form, as the furniture and old Morris himself had taken form, I observed that this purplish coloration was actual. It was a glistening, human-like, almost metallic-appearing thing, certainly 10 feet high, completely covered with great iridescent fish scales, each perhaps 4 inches in area, which shimmered as it leaped across the room. I saw it for only a matter of a second or two. I saw it clutch surely and with a deadly malignity the hunched body of old Morris, from behind, just as you will remember as the old man was about to climb into his bed. The dreadful thing turned him about as a wasp turns a fly, in great, flail-like, glistening arms, and never to the day of my death do I ever expect to be free of the look on old Morris's face. A look of a lost soul who knows that there is no hope for him in this world or the next. As the great, squat, rounded head, a head precisely like that of Mrs. Heidenklang's little fish jumbie, descended, revealing to my horrified sight one glimpse of a huge, scythe-like parrot beak which it used, with a nodding motion of the ugly head, to plunge into its writhing victim's breast, with a tearing motion like the barracuda when it attacks and tears. I fainted then, for that was the last of the fearful picture which I can remember. I awakened a little after 1 o'clock in a dark and empty room, peopled by no ghosts, and with my own more commonplace mahogany furniture thinly outlined in the faint light of the new moon, which was shining cleanly in a starry sky. The fresh night wind stirred the netting of my bed. I rose shakily and went and leaned out of the window and lit and puffed rapidly at a cigarette, which perhaps did something to settle my jangling nerves. The next morning, with a feeling of loathing which has gradually worn itself out in the course of the months which have now elapsed since my dreadful experience, I took up my drawing again, and added as well as I could the fearful scene I had witnessed. The complete picture was a horror, crude as is my work in this direction. I wanted to destroy it, but I did not, and I laid it away under some unused clothing in one of the large drawers of my bedroom wardrobe. 3 days later, just after Christmas, I observed Mr. Despard's car driving through the streets, the driver being alone. I stopped the boy and asked him where Mr. Despard was at the moment. The driver told me Mr. Despard was having breakfast, the West Indian midday meal, with Mr. Bonesteel at that gentleman's house on the Prince's Cross Street. I thanked him and went home. I took out the drawing, folded it, and placed it in the inside breast pocket of my coat, and started for Bonesteel's house. I arrived 15 minutes or so before the breakfast hour, and was pleasantly received by my old friend and his guest. Mr. Bonesteel pressed me to join them at breakfast, but I declined. Mr. Bonesteel brought in a swizzle compounded of his very old rum, and after partaking of this in ceremonious fashion, I engaged the attention of both gentlemen. "Gentlemen," said I trust that you will not regard me as too much of a bore, but I have, I believe, a legitimate reason for asking you if you will tell me the manner in which the gentleman known as old Morris, who once occupied my house, met his death. I stopped there and immediately discovered that I had thrown my kind old host into a state of embarrassed confusion. Glancing at Mr. Despard, I saw at once that if I had not actually offended him, I had by my question at least put him on his dignity. He was looking at me severely, rather, and I confess that for a moment I felt a bit like a schoolboy. Mr. Bonesteel caught something of this atmosphere and looked helplessly at Despard. Both men shifted uneasily in their chairs, each waited for the other to speak. Despard at last cleared his throat. "You will excuse me, Mr. Stewart," said he slowly, "but you have asked a question which for certain reasons no one, aware of the circumstances, would desire to answer. The reasons are, briefly, that Mr. Morris, in certain respects, was, what shall I say, not to do the matter an injustice? Well, perhaps I might say he was abnormal. I do not mean that he was crazy. He was, though, eccentric. His end was such that stating it would open up a considerable argument, one which agitated this island for a long time after he was found dead. By a kind of general consent, that matter is taboo on the island. That will explain to you why no one wishes to answer your question. I am free to say that Mr. Bonesteel here, in considerable distress, told me that you had asked it of him. You also asked me about it not long ago. I can add only that the manner of Mr. Morris's end was such that—" Mr. Despard hesitated and looked down, a frown on his brow, at his shoe which he tapped nervously on the tiled floor of the gallery where we were seated. "Old Morris, Mr. Stewart," he resumed after a moment's reflection, in which I imagined he was carefully choosing his words, "was, to put it plainly, murdered. There was much discussion over the identity of the murderer, but the most of it, the unpleasant part of the discussion, was rather whether he was killed by human agency or not. Perhaps you will see now, sir, the difficulty of the matter. To admit that he was murdered by an ordinary murderer is to my mind an impossibility. To assert that some other agency, something abhuman, killed him opens up the question of one's belief, one's credulity. Magic and occult agencies are, as you are aware, strongly entrenched in the minds of the ignorant people of these islands. None of us cares to admit a similar belief. Does that satisfy you, Mr. Stewart, and will you let the matter rest there, sir?" I drew out the picture, and without unfolding it, laid it across my knees. I nodded to Mr. Despard, and turning to our host, asked, "As a child, Mr. Bonesteel, were you familiar with the arrangement of Mr. Morris's bedroom?" "Yes, sir," replied Mr. Bonesteel, and added, "Everybody was. Persons who had never been in the old man's house crowded in when—" I intercepted a kind of warning look passing from Despard to the speaker. Mr. Bonesteel, looking much embarrassed, looked at me in that helpless fashion I have already mentioned, and remarked that it was hot weather these days. "Then," said I, "perhaps you will recognize its arrangement and even some of the details of its furnishing," and I unfolded the picture and handed it to Mr. Bonesteel. If I had anticipated its effect upon the old man, I would have been more discreet, but I confess I was nettled by their attitude. By handing it to Mr. Bonesteel, I could not give it to both of them at once. I did the natural thing, for he was our host. The old man looked at what I had handed him, and, this is the only way I can describe what happened, became suddenly as though petrified. His eyes bulged out of his head, his lower jaw dropped and hung open. The paper slipped from his nerveless grasp and fluttered and zigzagged to the floor, landing at Despard's feet. Despard stooped and picked it up, ostensibly to restore it to me, but in doing so he glanced at it and had his reaction. He leaped frantically to his feet and positively goggled at the picture, then at me. Oh, I was having my little revenge for their reticence right enough. "My God!" shouted Despard. "My God, Mr. Stewart, where did you get such a thing?" Mr. Bonesteel drew in a deep breath, the first it seemed for 60 seconds, and added his word. "Oh, my God," muttered the old man shakily. Mr. Stewart, what is it? What is it? Where—" "It is a Martinique fish zombie, what is known to professional occult investigators like Elliot O'Donnell and William Hope Hodgson as an elemental," I explained calmly. "It is a representation of how poor Mr. Morris actually met his death. Until now, as I understand it, a purely conjectural matter. Christiansted is built on the ruins of French Bassin, you will remember," I added. "It is a very likely spot for an elemental." But, almost shouted Mr. Despard, "Mr. Stewart, where did you get this? It's—" "I made it," said I quietly, folding up the picture and placing it back in my inside pocket. "But how?" This from both Despard and Bonesteel, speaking in unison. "I saw it happen, you see," I replied, taking my hat, bowing formally to both gentlemen, and murmuring my regret at not being able to remain for breakfast, I departed. and as I reached the bottom of Mr. Bonesteel's gallery steps and turned along the street in the direction of old Morris's house, where I live, I could hear their voices speaking together. "But how? How?" This was Bonesteel. "Why? Why?" And that was Despard. End of The Shadows.